Welcome to Haunting Spectres. Have we got a terror treat for you? For the best experience, headphones are recommended. Please like and subscribe. In the heart of England, in the rapidly growing suburban town of Ashcroft, stood an anomaly. Amidst rows of uniform houses built in the 1990s, there was one house that predated them all. Ashcroft Manor, a grand stone mansion built in 1789, stood as a reminder of a bygone era. It was home to an elderly couple, the Ashcrofts, who rarely ventured out and were the subject of many whispered conversations among the new residents. They were seen as peculiar, but in truth, they kept to themselves and harmed no one. 13-year-old Jamie Parker was a bright and adventurous boy with a fascination for history. His father, a local historian, often regaled him with tales of old buildings and local legends, fueling Jamie's curiosity. Every morning, as Jamie rode his bike through the sleepy town delivering newspapers, he would pass by Ashcroft Manor. It fascinated him. The house seemed to be in a perpetual state of shadow, even on the brightest of days. Jamie's friends often dared each other to approach it, but none had the courage. The Ashcrofts, an elderly couple living in the manor, were rarely seen. Mr. and Mrs. Ashcroft were the last descendants of the Ashcroft family, who had a dark history intertwined with the house. The townspeople had many superstitions about them, but the Ashcrofts kept to themselves and appeared harmless. One dark autumn morning, the air was crisp and the fog hung low over the ground, creating an eerie atmosphere. Jamie noticed something unusual as he approached Ashcroft Manor. The front door was ajar. His heart raced with a mixture of fear and excitement. He had always wondered what lay inside that house, and now, it seemed, he had the perfect opportunity to find out. He leaned his bike against the rusty gate and slowly made his way up the gravel path. Each step he took seemed to echo in the stillness of the morning. As he pushed the door open wider, it creaked loudly, almost as if it were warning him to stay away. Ignoring the nagging voice in his head telling him to turn back, Jamie stepped inside. The interior of Ashcroft Manor was dark and musty. The air was thick with the scent of decay and age. Dust motes danced in the dim light filtering through the grimy windows. Jamie's eyes widened as he took in the antique furniture, the faded wallpaper, and the cobwebs hanging like ghostly drapes from the ceiling. The house felt alive, as if it were watching him. Jamie ventured deeper into the house, his footsteps muffled by the thick, threadbare carpet. He found himself in a grand hallway lined with portraits of stern-looking individuals, presumably the previous owners of the manor. Their eyes seemed to follow him, judging him for his intrusion. A shiver ran down his spine, but he pressed on, driven by curiosity. Suddenly, he heard faint whispers, indistinct and haunting. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably malevolent. The temperature seemed to drop the further he went, and he felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. A loud bang, like a door slamming shut, echoed through the house. Jamie turned around, but the hallway behind him was empty. Panic began to set in. Jamie tried to retrace his steps, but the house seemed to have changed. Corridors that had been there moments ago were gone, replaced by unfamiliar passages. The walls seemed to close in on him, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Shadows danced at the edge of his vision, and he felt the distinct sensation of being watched. Desperate to escape, Jamie broke into a run. He rounded a corner and found himself in a large, dimly lit room. There were no mirrors, but the walls seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie light. He felt as though the house was closing in on him, the very walls breathing and alive. As Jamie stood in the center of the room, the whispers grew louder, surrounding him. He could hear voices, fragmented and distorted, as if they were coming from the walls themselves. He pressed his hands to his ears, trying to block out the noise, but it only grew louder, drilling into his mind. The walls began to move, subtly at first, then more overtly. They seemed to ripple and undulate, like the surface of a pond disturbed by a pebble. Jamie watched in horror as faces began to form in the wallpaper, grotesque and twisted. They mouthed silent screams, their eyes filled with torment. Jamie backed away, his heart pounding in his chest. He tried to find an exit, but the room seemed to have no doors. The walls continued to close in, the faces becoming more distinct, more real. He could feel their pain, their fear, seeping into him. Suddenly, a section of the wall bulged out, forming a hand that reached for him. Jamie screamed and tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. The hand grabbed his arm with a grip like iron, pulling him towards the wall. He struggled, but it was futile. The wall seemed to absorb his strength, feeding off his fear. As the hand pulled him closer, Jamie felt the cold, clammy surface of the wall against his skin. It felt like living flesh, pulsating and warm. The faces in the wall seemed to laugh, their eyes gleaming with malevolent joy. Jamie's terror reached a fever pitch as he realized what was happening. The house was consuming him. He felt his body being pulled into the wall, the cold surface enveloping him. The whispers grew deafening, a cacophony of voices screaming in his mind. He could feel his very essence being drained, his life force seeping into the walls of Ashcroft Manor. Jamie tried to scream, but no sound escaped his lips. His vision blurred as the wall closed around him, and he felt himself being pulled into darkness. His last conscious thought was of his parents, who would wonder where he had gone. He tried to call out, but his voice was lost in the void. The room fell silent once more, the walls returning to their normal state. The faces disappeared, leaving no trace of the boy who had dared to enter Ashcroft Manor. The whispers faded, and the house stood still, its malevolent presence hidden beneath a veneer of decay. Days turned into weeks, and Jamie's disappearance became the talk of the town. His bike was found abandoned at the gate, but there were no clues as to what had happened to him. The Ashcrofts, oblivious to the events, continued their quiet existence, unaware of the horror that had taken place in their home. Jamie's parents were devastated, and the townspeople speculated endlessly. Friends of Jamie shared various myths and ghost stories about Ashcroft Manor, each adding to the house's dark legend. Despite the growing fear and curiosity, no one dared to investigate further. The house seemed to emanate a warning, a silent promise of doom to any who might intrude. The backstory of the Ashcrofts and their connection to the house began to unravel. Mr. and Mrs. Ashcroft were the last living members of the Ashcroft family, which had a long and tragic history. Diaries and letters discovered later revealed the house's malevolent presence, a curse that had plagued the family for generations. The Ashcrofts knew the house was cursed and haunted by the spirits of their ancestors, but they were powerless to leave or warn others. They lived in constant fear, maintaining their reclusive lifestyle in a futile attempt to avoid the house's wrath. Jamie's disappearance had a profound impact on the town of Ashcroft. The search for him was exhaustive, but ultimately futile. The mystery of his fate added to the fear and fascination surrounding Ashcroft Manor. Parents warned their children to stay away, and the house became even more shrouded in mystery and fear. Years later, the Ashcrofts passed away, and the house was left abandoned. Nature began to reclaim it, vines creeping up the walls and the roof sagging under the weight of neglect. But on dark, foggy mornings, some said they could hear faint whispers and see shadows moving within the manor's decaying walls. and if one were to place their ear against the cold, clammy surface of the walls, they might hear the faint, desperate cries of a boy forever trapped within the haunted walls of Ashcroft Manor.